So hi Ritu, and thanks for joining. Tell us a little bit about you. Who are you and who are Aubilities?
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. I'm Ritu, and who am I?
That's a deep question. Ritu, you have a passion for neurodiversity and you've now made it your career and your business. So tell me a little bit about why you've gone down that journey, what inspired you, and then great to understand what the business is.
In 2016, I had my firstborn, my son, Kyan. And then in 2018, when he was 2, he was diagnosed autistic. So being a first-time parent, I really didn't know what that meant for him or for myself now as going down that parent care journey. And almost a year later, I went through a near-death experience where, I wasn't sure if I was going to survive. So that really was a big moment for me because I had to think about what I want to do with the rest of my life if I survive. Obviously, I survived, I'm here. But, it really changed my purpose. And what I realized was I want to help the neurodivergent community, for my son, Kyan, and other generations like him, as well as the existing workforce within workplaces. So that's really the inspiration was my son. And so in 2020, I established Aubilities, which stands for All Abilities, because that's what we advocate for. And essentially, we focus on 3 key areas. One's around raising awareness of neurodiversity and all the different types of neurodivergent conditions. The second is around building acceptance. So how do we really support the neurodivergent workforce? And the third is around data insights. So how do we provide organizations data insights to be able to track and understand more about their neurodivergent workforce, because that's never been done before. And we've placed all of that within our bespoke SaaS solution, which is what we sell to organizations.
It might just be interesting to first of all talk about maybe the types of neurodiversity and the types of different things that we all have together, and then maybe the great examples of people that are using their special gifts, because I think a lot of the time obviously people focus on the things that we're weak on rather than things that we're strong on. So yeah, if you could just maybe run through some of them and highlight some of the personalities out in the world that are well known.
Yeah, absolutely. So neurodiversity obviously encompasses a range of neurological differences, and some of the most common ones, for example, are autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, even Tourette's syndrome. And there are many people all across the world, and if we think about some famous people and celebrities, you've got Elon Musk, for example, who's autistic on the spectrum. You've got Richard Branson, who's dyslexic. You've got yourself, Steve, under the ADHD umbrella. And you've got many others. You've got some sports personalities, and you've got a lot of creatives that fit other neurodivergence.
I'm just happy you put me in the same bracket as Elon Musk and Richard Branson. So thanks for that. And I guess in the workplace. So what's Aubilities trying to do? What challenge and what problems do you see that you now want to dedicate your career to?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that 1 in 7 people are diagnosed neurodivergent, and the key word there is diagnosed, because obviously there's many people that aren't diagnosed. So actually that statistic's probably a lot more significant. And that equates to about 15 to 20% of the world's population that are neurodivergent. So again, we know that the workforce has neurodivergent folks within. So how do we help support them and optimize them? And that's where Aubilities comes in. We have developed a SaaS solution, so a software as a service, and primarily we focus on 3 key areas. One's around education. So how do we educate people in the workplace around neurodiversity? And that's not just neurodivergent people, that's also for neurotypical people, because you could be a manager who's managing someone neurodivergent, or working with a supplier or a vendor who might be neurodivergent. And then after the education piece, we also try to build acceptance, which is how do you truly get the most out of people and the most out of your teams to build better teams, more productive teams. So we have a range of assessments to help understand how people are wired, and not just how they're wired in terms of their neurological preferences, but also their feelings and preferences. So if you have a holistic understanding of behavior as well, you can then align your tasks and activities for that individual and therefore get more out of them.
So, and I guess if you're going to, if you were to work with a company and you said that you smashed it, you nailed it, right? You allowed that company to do all the things that you think that Aubilities should do, and therefore are maximising the potential and creating psychological safety. What is that north goal for a company with its journey with its neurodivergent population look like?
So we don't want to advocate for othering, and what we mean by othering is having two separate segregated groups of neurotypicals and neurodivergent folks. What we're saying is actually we should have universal processes and universal design, so that whatever we design, whether it's a building, so physical space and environment, or whether it's designing content, for example, anything we do has accessibility at the core and has universal design at the core, so it is available and accessible by all employees.
And what's the benefits to an organisation, I think, for understanding, embracing this?
Well, I mean, the benefits are huge. They range. So you've got benefits such as, it is a hot topic right now in diversity and inclusion. It's key for business branding. But there's also cost benefits. For example, there are some companies out there like your Microsoft, your SAP, who have proven through case studies that if you hire neurodivergent folks and you support them, you've got a higher retention rate, which means that from a cost perspective, that the business and the organization is saving costs of re-recruiting, rehiring, retraining, all of that. And actually the people who are neurodivergent, who are supported, then stay in those roles. They feel comfortable and they feel supported by their organization and happy to stay there.
And maybe to hit to that point, right? Because I think, again, back to that point where, as we probably educating our own children for, mine are neurodivergent as well, that there are gifts that are special, that gives us special powers, and there are weaknesses that we have. So maybe just a little bit for, I guess, people that are not fully familiar with both sides, because, I'm sure you've heard it the same as I do, right? People go, oh, yeah, ADHD, really upset about that, you've got a mental health problem. Yeah, there's not really a great link between those two. Though. It could be a secondary thing if it's not supported, but there's obviously that lack of education. I think is a huge thing. So just for now, just highlight for us, if you could, some of those strengths of maybe a couple of those different types of neurodivergent types.
Yep. So let's talk about probably the most common three. So we've got autism, and again, you've got a wide spectrum. So this really, I have to emphasize, it's completely generalizing. And of course, one autistic person is not the same as another. But some of the common strengths and traits that we've seen is they have a phenomenal memory. If I look at even my own son, he's got an eidetic memory, and it's an amazing thing to see. But also you can, people who are autistic prefer routine and structure, which can actually help them be more productive as well. And on the flip side, you've got ADHDers who probably less so on the structure and the routine, but very, very much hyper-thinking and ideas people, and can put solutions in place that probably others hadn't thought about. And then you've got your dyslexics. There's been actually a lot of studies recently to show that there is a correlation between dyslexia and creatives. There's a lot of celebrities out there in the creative industries, like singers and actors and sportsmanships, and they are dyslexic, as well as, of course, entrepreneurs, like we've mentioned.
And it's interesting, therefore, if you're building teams, it's like the ability to understand, I think, those strengths and some degree design those teams with those special gifts those people have. But in awareness that, if you put 4 ADHD people in a room, you're probably going to get an amazing set of ideas, but they may not come to fruition. Likewise, there might be a similar thing if you put 4 people with autism in a room, what would happen, you think?
Well, of course, you'd get great productivity, but again, you might not have the creativity, because they're not usually as strong in creativity as, say, a dyslexic person. But to that point, there, if you're hiring, let's say, 4 people in your team, and you interview them, and you find that person number 1, on your scale of skills that you're assessing, scores 7 out of 10. Person 2 does the same, person 3 does the same, but person 4, they scored 9 out of 10 for some aspects, but 2 out of 10 for others. You're likely to hire the 7 out of 10s because you think, oh, they're an all-rounder. But actually, you need the person that is 9 out of 10 on some aspects and 2 out of 10 on others, because you need that specialist thinking. Those extra 2 points in some aspects could be the difference between your team being innovative and non-innovative. And I was going to say, actually, Deloitte did a study, and what they found was if you have some neurodivergent people in teams, that team is likely to be up to 30% more productive.
So to that point, I think... there's the opportunity. I think what you're saying is if organizations, directors, leaders, managers, individuals really truly understand this, you're able to, instead of being put off by maybe one of the attributes, the negative attributes towards it, you can maybe understand it, be more empathetic about it, but then actually and also utilize the gift part towards it, the creativity, the productivity, the entrepreneurial level towards it, which a little spice of that on top of, kind of a stereotypical workforce might be the difference that's going to make that outperform a purely stereotypical team.
That's exactly it. And, the thing to remember here is we know that there's, like I mentioned, 15 to 20% of the world's population neurodivergent. We know that's an underestimation. The diagnosis methods have changed significantly across the decades, which means that it's now easier to recognize and easier to diagnose. So this is not something that is going away. In fact, the levels are increasing year on year. So we're seeing more diagnosis, which means we're going to have more neurodivergent people. So the time is now to find ways in which to support them and therefore leverage and optimize that specialist thinking.
Okay, so I love that so far. So we now go to, I guess, my pet topic, which is learning and inclusion around that post. So just with your expertise, a bit of a leading question, but how do you think the understanding of learning design and neurodiversity is married today? I mean, do you think we've nailed it, or at the beginning of that journey?
I think we're at the beginning of the journey. There are some real key aspects when we're designing content. So, if you're putting content on platforms, we know that there are the WCAG 0.2 standards. But equally, you've also got accessibility standards. For example, looking at the way fonts, colors, and how the animation, if it's animated, interacts with each other, and also using things like captioning and subtitles and different voices and all sorts of things. And there's accessibility tools out there that can also change the colors or the lightness or darkness and so forth of content. And I think it's understanding and giving people more flexibility so that the individual, the user, can pick and choose what works for them in terms of their learning.
Yeah, I think probably what's true, right, is although things like learning styles and learning preferences debunked in many ways, I think actually when it comes to diversity, actually some of those things, there's some truth inside that. There is preferences, I would believe, that an ADHD person learns. I mean, if I look upon why I've created Fuse School, and bite-sized videos for kids, or Fuse as a platform which is open and collaborative and so forth, I think it's to fill the gap for the type of way that I want to learn. So, the analogy is, you look at Stan Lee, the comic book editor and hero of many of us. When somebody asked him, who does he create the comic books for? And he said it's himself. George Lucas of Star Wars fame, who did you create your movies for? It's himself. And I think for me, Fuse School and Fuse, I was creating it for myself and my children, because saying the current way doesn't work, that 100% structure way for an ADHD brain is completely bad for us, right? The classroom is a horrible environment for us because our brain is sparking out and going all over the place, and you're saying, no, you've got to just look at the next page. I go back to when I was a trainer, and I'd have a person at the front of the classroom who just wants to go through in a completely logical structure, and there's an ADHD person at the back of the room saying, can you answer a question for me from page 77? If I answered that for that person, it really upset the person at the front who just absolutely can't deal with something that's not unstructured. Yeah. So I think what we probably both believe in, right, is that how do we continue to understand that and design flexible systems that the people who want to go through structure can do, the people that want to be able to jump around and see and actually be go in an order that's logical to their inspired mind. So I see the menu, that bit looks most interesting, that bit, and trying to get the people that understand that, who design content and learn experiences. If you're trying to force everyone, especially some of the neurodivergent population, through one way of doing it, you're really going to alienate that audience and the gift they have to contribute towards the organization. You're trying to fit them into your box. Yep. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I totally agree. And actually, it starts with the education system and it starts with schooling. We are, brought up in exactly what you just mentioned, formal education, where you have a teacher who has a structured way of doing the national curriculum. And that's what we know. So when we then enter the workforce, that is what we expect, because that's all we know. And you're right, it doesn't work for neurodivergent people. This is why a huge population of neurodivergent people do not make it through the education system with formal qualifications and end up being unemployed. In fact, they are the highest group in terms of unemployment rate. So, we need to think, the problem starts earlier. We need to think about how do we create content in terms of national curriculum, Fuse School, which is more accessible for neurodivergent children. And it is around some of that flexibility and also educating schools on what that looks like in terms of flexibility as well. I'll give you a great example. So my son last year was in year 2, and the government here do an assessment at year 2. And they did a maths assessment, and the question on the paper was something like, Sally has 5 green apples. She gives 2 green apples away, but then she has another 4 red apples. How many apples does Sally have? And he could not work it out. He read the question and he could not work it out. So he failed. And then the teacher put in front of him 5 plus 4, minus 2 or whatever. And he got it like that, because numbers he gets. Mm-hmm. So the real question is, what are we doing in the education system? Why do we say it's necessary to understand the words over the numbers? Why can't we say this kid understands numbers better. Let's do something more with him to really push that.
And I really believe that. I think the wave of technology we got, plus this wave of new AI generative technology and the ability to personalize experience, I think is the answer to that. I mean, I sit down now with my kids in the evening going through maths, and the combination of using Fuse and Fuse School and generative AI, where we're able to say, okay, this technique didn't work. Can you give me a different technique that's more towards that? And exactly with my kid too, right? That when he put all that complicated stuff, he didn't get it. And but then we just asked just put a prompt in and say, can you just take all that stuff out and ask a simple question, and bam, they kind of get it. So I think the ability now to create hyper-personalized experiences that are able to change on the fly to the person that's going through towards it, I think is a big part of the answer. I think the technologies are there now. Yeah. It's just understanding how to leverage it to create these, hyper-personalized experiences.
Raising awareness and the way in which we design content and the way in which people optimize that content is one thing, right? And then we need to build further change on that. So to your point, from a learning perspective, yes, absolutely, we should be looking at how do we make it more accessible? How do we really get people engaged with it? And then for me, from a neurodivergence perspective, I'm looking at then how do we build upon that? Because we've just started with the raising awareness. How do we now start building that into the organizations, embedding it into their culture? So actually neurodiversity is not an othering kind of topic. It's something that people know and it's normalized.
Well, and I think going back to the journey that you're on, I think part of also what you're doing is you're being a bit of Neo in the Matrix. You're awakening people to what they are. Because probably for yourself, once you realize that your son and you were autistic, you've gone through a journey of understanding that probably meant that in some ways, same as it was for me, you're being told through your career that there's something wrong with you, right? Or at school that there's something wrong with you. People at work say, look, you talk too much, there's a problem there. And you think, God, there's something wrong. Then you realize, okay, my brain's wired slightly differently. I can now start to make choices. I still find it hard, right? I mean, most meetings I'm in, I've got two voices. In my head, I've got one voice, which is I really need to listen and hear what that person's saying, and the other voice going, ooh, I've got an idea. I've got an idea to go through, right? And it's a constant battle, which I'm battling with. But at least the awareness of it was a massive step for me to try to improve myself every day and be respectful of the audience in front of us. Yeah. So what you're really doing is trying to awaken as many people as possible to who they are, and recognizing that you haven't got a problem, but the criticism you in the past was maybe unfair. And you have now can start that journey of being the best version of yourself. And I guess that's at the heart of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's three groups that we appeal to, right? So one is the neurotypicals and, making sure that they have education around neurodiversity and understand neurodivergent people. The second is neurodivergent people. So those who have been diagnosed or self-diagnosed, doesn't mean they understand everything, doesn't mean they know what's going to work for them, doesn't mean they know what support mechanisms are out there to help them and support them in the workplace. So we help in that respect. And the third group is that question mark group of, am I neurodivergent? I need to learn more about it. I need to understand more about it. Maybe it would sway me to go and get a diagnosis. And it's that group we also appeal to. So I think there are three groups within the workforce that already exist today. And they are the three groups that we are trying to support.
And so if you had the opportunity to talk to a leader in a company, a learning leader or an operational leader in an organization, where would you guide them to start?
I mean, it's vast. So the first thing, we work with several clients, and usually those who are at the start of their neurodiversity journey, what we end up doing first is pulling together an employee resource group. So finding folks within the organization who are happy to come forward, form a group, and they end up being the champions or the advocacy group of that organization. Then we work closely with them as well as the diversity inclusion teams to figure out a strategy. And, it's not about a tick in the box, and it's not about a big bang approach. It's really about understanding what's going to work for this organization and the neurodivergent workforce within. That usually starts with raising the awareness. So some training sessions, some webinars. We've got a huge platform of digital content that we have, both created and curated content. And then it's about embedding some of the assessments that I talked about. So finding out what their strengths are for each individual within a team, so you can leverage, as a manager, leverage those strengths. Understanding, is all your team full of creatives? Well, then you're probably missing some analytical skills or some numerical skills for some particular tasks and activities. So it's understanding the team's strengths and where those differences are, and where you've got some kind of normalization across the team. And then it's also about understanding what support mechanisms are available. So what can be put in place to support these people to get them to be either more productive or increase performance. And then finally, I think it's providing data back to organizations. So interestingly, neurodiversity is covered under disability laws and equality laws for most countries. And yet many organizations are not tracking any of this data. And the reason for that is things like recruitment processes where people do not feel comfortable to come forward and disclose that they might be neurodivergent because they think it would be a negative experience as part of the recruitment experience, so they don't come forward and disclose. But and that's why the organisation can't track who's coming in terms of neurodiversity, so they don't know what their neurodivergent workforce looks like, and again, don't know how to support them, even though it's something that's protected by law.
And how do you feel about the word disorder, it being referred to? What's your thoughts on that?
So there is a huge backlash, I guess, from most neurodivergent people because disorder is clearly a negative term. So from a social perspective, people do not like the term disorder. So if we look at autism ASD, they would prefer ASC, where the C stands for condition, so autism spectrum condition, as opposed to autism spectrum disorder. However, the disorders is a medical model, right? That's what they use to diagnose. That's what they use to classify. So if you're someone in the medical field, you will use disorder. But if you're someone who is in the neurodivergent community, the likelihood is you will use condition. And actually even condition is starting to be now also challenged of whether that's the correct word. Like with anything, language evolves and changes and people have different preferences. And something that we do at Aubilities is on every piece of training or content that we have a disclaimer that says that we understand there's a host of different terminology preferences and we just use a host of them to ensure that we are capturing everybody's preferences.
Because it is interesting for me, right? Because I hear the term special needs when I think maybe when we get to a place that we're on the journey to now, and I think accelerated pace, I think it just becomes special, right? Because I think upon my kids who maybe are learning in a certain place in a certain way, but they're trying to learn in a way that's been designed for a stereotypical audience towards it. I'm pretty sure once the learning is designed for the way that maximizes their brain, how their brain's wired, they're going to go on an accelerated learning journey towards it. So I'm just when I hear the words disorder and so forth, I think it's just saying that because we're different and our brains are wired differently, it doesn't mean we're better or worse towards it, but we are different.
But I think there's still a huge amount of stigma attached. So one client, I will tell you this story, Steve. So they have policies, like HR policies, like every organization does. And they said, yeah, we're aware of neurodiversity. We've changed our policies and so forth. You know what I'm going to say. And they changed the wording and they said, autistic people may be like this, such so and so. And despite this, and so words like despite this obviously also imply that it's negative. So, people, even though they're waking up to understanding more that there are people with neurodivergent conditions, we've still got those kind of negative associations, even if they're not intentional.
Yeah. So if I guess you look forward to maybe a year or two, where would you like to see, I guess, the companies you're working with get to?
So it is all about embedding neuro-inclusion, right? It's ensuring that neurodiversity is embedded within the culture of the organization. And the way we do that is the tools that we have and the functionality that we've built within our SaaS solutions are embedded within their existing processes. We want to be able to showcase to organizations a return on investment in terms of what they work with us for. And the only way we can do that is by proving that they can have more productive teams by supporting their neurodivergent workforce.
And I guess if you look at a really super high level, right, I guess the reason why we were Fuse was happy to be the guinea pig, right, for your first program. I think for us it was, that's the base level of psychological safety. So people feel, because you want people to feel, hey, I'm ADHD or I'm dyslexic, I'm autistic, and I'm okay, I'm good with that, right? I'm not going to get judged. There are so many people I know in other companies who wouldn't say that, right? Because they think, that's going to be used as a weapon against me towards it. So I think the first one is that psychological safety piece. I think the second is then that ability to, how do you maximize potential of your company? I mean, we had in our survey, I think 25% plus people, neurodivergent inside Fuse. And we want to celebrate that, but we also want to maximize it. So maybe we don't ask one of the sales guys that's dyslexic to fill out a 50-page RFP document. That if you want to put creative ideas into a room and get brainstorming towards it, you throw a dyslexic person or two into a room towards it. Maybe with the autistic person that's going to be amazing at documenting it, structuring it, and so forth towards it. You want some problem solving. You want to go to, hey, can we get some ADHD people in the room towards it, rather than maybe the people that are not as naturally as great at problem solving elsewhere. I think if we really start to do that, right, then you start to build teams. You understand some of those weaknesses, but I think the exciting bit comes about you'll love each other a bit more, you're connected to each other a bit more, you're celebrating each other a bit more, but you're also succeeding a bit more because you're utilizing everyone's strengths.
That's it. You want a specialist team, right? So every individual has a specialism that can do something really, really well that you need within your team. Like we were discussing, it's you don't want a bunch of 7 out of 10s. You need some 9s. You need some 2s. You need a mixture. You need a variety because you need that diversity of thought.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'd say is that obviously I'm really keen to see what we can do with Fuse School to see how we can also, disrupt the education system and to use this way to help teachers get better. So for us, it's not just about the corporate part, but I think the education system too needs that revamp. But I just want to say thanks, Ritu. Thanks for, I think, both the podcast and having this conversation. But I think huge, I think, for us as a neurodivergent community to say thanks for you going on your journey. I think everyone who's part of our community who meets you is amazed that you've now and happy that you make this your business.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I love what I do. And I am so glad that I'm on this journey. And if it wasn't for my son, who was my inspiration, I wouldn't be here. But no, I absolutely love working with neurodivergent people. I've met a whole bunch that are fantastic. And I wouldn't change it for the world.
Sometimes getting us together, though, especially the ADHD group, is a little tricky.
I love it.